Welcome to Perusing's Appraisers on Purpose podcast. Our podcast showcases inspiring appraisers and professionals from the industry who are leaders in their field. How did they get to where they are? What have they learned along the way? What can we learn from them? Your host is real estate investor, entrepreneur, and appraiser, Michael Hobbs.
Welcome back. We are so glad you're joining us for another episode of Perusing's Appraisers on Purpose, Power of Values. Just such a great community experience, impacting so many people across so many geographies, not just here in the contiguous United States. Great stuff. Shout out to our peers north of the border, and several of them have been joining from south of the border. It's exciting times. Appraisal happens in all different parts of the world, and some of them pay attention to USPAP, and some of them don't. Doesn't really matter. That's what makes it fun. That's what makes it interesting. And that's what makes it informative. And before we jump in, another great perspective we're going to hear today from a distinguished peer. Make sure that you're liking the podcast. It makes a difference. It's a small side of generosity that continues to pay it forward for many of our peers. And before we're done today, one or two people are probably going to come to mind. You're like, man, they should totally hear what I heard today. So be generous and share this episode as well. With that, I'm excited to introduce our guest, Glen Kangas. Thanks for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure.
Appreciate it, man. Appreciate it. As we love to hear on every single episode of the podcast, Glen, were you born this way, or how did your life come to intersect the appraisal and valuation profession?
Well, after listening to a number of the podcasts, I think mine is a little more boring than some of them, but
they're never boring. They're just different paths. That's all it is. Different paths.
Yeah, no question. No question. I had a degree in political science from UCLA, had no interest in working in that field. I did that because I was a time of Reagan and Gorbachev and the fall of communism, and I didn't want to be an engineer, which is what I started out. So I got that degree, and then I was working as a waiter, figuring out what I was going to do. And my first wife, her cousin was an appraiser.
Oh, really?
She was wanting to get more women into appraising, which, as you know, has been an issue for many years. So
yes,
she told her about it. She signed up for a class on a Saturday at PCC, a local junior college, Pasadena City College.
Mm-hmm.
And I had nothing else going on, so I joined her. And I ended up becoming an appraiser, and my first wife ended up becoming a teacher.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah. So not of appraising though. So
okay,
but yeah. So I took the class. I liked it. I love math and numbers. I was good at geometry, and I love figuring out puzzles and things like that. So
wow.
I'm the one who ended up doing it. Just what we need is another white guy joining it. But it's...
Yeah, but let's put it in perspective. So we're pulling out some Wayback Machine here. Most of our listeners know exactly what your reference was to Reagan and Gorbachev. But there are people here who have no idea what you're talking about. Share a little bit about what the times were like back then that had you go to UCLA and get a degree, any degree, in this case, political science, because of the times.
Yeah, I got into UCLA as an engineering major. I was very good in math and science in high school, but I enjoy the numbers part more so than the really intricate detail. So
yes,
I ended up UCLA, and I was in a class one day, theoretical calculus.
Ooh.
And we were discussing determining the mass of a blob in space. And that was enough for me. I went and immediately changed my major. And so trying to figure out what to do, I took a few other classes in different things. But the politics was really fascinating at the time with what was going on in the world. And we had professors there that were advisors to presidents, including the current president. So it was just really interesting and a fascinating time to study it. I did an internship one summer, but I didn't want to work in the field because it's very unstable. Here you're either, if you're going to work for an elected official,
yes,
you're either going to go back and forth between Washington and California or up to Sacramento down to Southern California. Just not, I wanted to, have a family, be a good father, be home for my kids, that kind of thing. So I got the degree and then had to figure out what I was going to do. I didn't want to become an attorney or anything like that. That wasn't an interest I had. And so, yeah, it was just, Reagan and Gorbachev is, the political times now are about as fascinating as they were then. But at that time, it was pretty unique. The fall of communism after growing up during the Cold War and all you heard about was the Cold War.
Yes.
The changes that happened then were really, really exciting. So I loved studying it. I just didn't want to work in it.
That's a great way to put it, that you love studying it, but you didn't want to work in it.
Yeah, it's like a lot of places you go on vacation. Oh, this is a great place to visit.
Got
I live
it.
in California because the weather's beautiful all year round, and I have access to lots of things, and there's lots of areas that I love to visit, but I probably wouldn't enjoy living. So
that is quite the comment, given that are you a native Californian?
I was born in Pasadena, grew up in San Gabriel Valley near Pasadena.
Yep.
That's just been home my whole life, and
got it.
I enjoy it.
Oh, that's fantastic. That is fantastic. So here you are. It sounds like a relatively successful waiter. There you are,
Oh, yeah. I was rocking it, I did it for like 8 years, through college. It's obviously a great job for
great
quick cash, high dollar per hour when you're in college and things like that. So it's a great learning experience. Learning service and dealing with the public. It can be humbling, it can be frustrating, it can be lots of things, but it's a great experience for one to go through, to prepare to work in the real world. So,
wow.
So yeah, I did that, and then I took the class, and then of course, everybody's got the same problem. How do you get a job, right, as an appraiser?
Yes.
So back then they called it provisional in California. It's called trainee now. So
okay,
I got my provisional license, but I had no job, and I was applying to different places and things like that, and then. Friends of my family, she was a realtor. Well, her ex-son-in-law, her daughter's first husband,
sure,
was a manager of an appraisal office and an appraiser.
Really?
And it turned out to be an office that I applied to. They had an ad.
Yes.
I applied to it and never got called.
Oh, wow.
So she connects me. I go down like on a Thursday or Friday to meet him. And I think I'm going for an interview. And I show up and, we talk for like 10 minutes and he's like, yeah, okay, we can start on a Monday and blah, 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 and just.
Are you kidding me? I love that.
Yeah, right. It's who you know. It's not what you know.
Yep. There's so much truth to that.
Which in that case was good because I didn't know anything.
Yeah.
So what you know wasn't going to do me any good there. So, and it was just a firm in Southern California that, had guys, and people would leave, people would, stay, and the owner of the company was actually an airline pilot for Continental.
No kidding.
And bought the company, not too long before that.
Yeah.
As a, way to make additional money besides being an airline pilot.
Wow.
And his son worked, his son was the person who trained me. He was an SRA. Yes. He had another son in Chicago who was an appraiser.
Wow.
And there was other appraisers too.
Sure.
And it was just, just a little appraisal office. We did appraisals for $250. That was the marketing thing, was to be cheap.
Wow.
But it was the way I got in, and, you're learning, you're using microfiche and DOS-based stuff, and you got Thomas Brothers maps, and we actually had a couple of girls in the office that did a lot of that, cleaned up the reports for us and made some of the addendums and things like that, taped the photo, double-sided tape with the photos and hand delivering, mailing the reports. And, it's, the not quite the Green Hornet days. I didn't experience those, but it certainly was archaic. That's for sure. So
love the Green Hornet reference. What was the ratio of people doing appraisal versus people in more of a staff or support kind of role?
We had 2 girls that were the staff, answered the phones, did all the paperwork, and the number of appraisers ranged from 4 to, I think, 6 or 7 was the most at any one time when I was there.
Yeah.
And I worked there for like 10 years. we actually did, of course, this is in 93. So I start in January of 93. I learn appraising. I'm learning appraising. And in the summer, I'm, busy and I'm making, more money than I ever thought I could make. And then my daughter's born in November that year. And I don't remember what the reason was, but if it was the interest rates, I think the interest rates jumped up. So I took like 4 or 5 days off when my daughter was born in November.
Sure.
And I came back and I was like, somebody had turned the faucet off. I mean, there's nothing.
No.
We would stand around and worship the fax machine back then.
Oh, yeah. The fax machine worship.
And that thing, it's like, is it plugged in? Is there paper? Is there, So I went from that to, come back and I got a new child now and nothing, and just, we blew through our savings so fast. I went from making tons of money and had saved some money to it was gone. And we're like, what are we going to do? And then I get my license, I get upgraded from provisional to, I actually went to certified pretty fast.
Oh, okay.
But I get it. And of course, with that, I was supposed to get a pay raise. My percentage commission was supposed to go up. And at that point, they're like, we can't raise the commissions. We aren't having any work. We have to, hold you at what you're at. So, and that wasn't we actually had that happen a couple of times where I was due for a raise and then didn't get it. But
that's not a person.
So we started doing foreclosure work, and we also kind of started a management company.
Really?
We did the foreclosure work, and then we had, for Security Pacific Bank, we were doing pre-foreclosure drive-bys.
Yep.
And then we're talking to them, and they had, well, you know anybody in Chicago? We're having trouble in Chicago. And, well, that's where the owner's other son lived and worked and was an appraiser.
Yeah.
Sure. And so then, light bulb goes on, and we're like, hey, we could do this all around the country. So we did that for a while and it was all foreclosure work. There was no refinance work, no purchase work. It was just foreclosure, short sales, REO, pre-foreclosure, drive-bys, all that kind of stuff. And we operated as a management company for 6 or 7 years.
Yes.
And they were still doing it for a little while once I left, but I ended up running that and not being in the field for a couple of years. And then I went back to the field.
Interesting.
I prefer the work versus trying to hustle appraisers to do them for, $175 around the country for appraisal. So
sure, that makes sense.
But it was a great education for me. And we, like I say, when I started, it was, refi stuff, but then the first, probably majority of the first 5 years of my career was all foreclosure, loss mitigation, short sale.
Wow.
As repaired, quick sale value. That's all I knew,
It's a great training ground.
Yeah. I mean, it actually works great because now you get these, fix and flip ones, and it's not much different. I mean, it's a similar thing, just in a different order.
Totally agree.
So yeah, that was fascinating to do that. And we drove all over. I just drove cars to death. And,
More importantly, Glenn, whose car were you driving?
I was driving my car.
Well, that's kind of the way it goes.
No car provided. They paid for basically the E&O and the software. And that kind of stuff. But I paid for pretty much everything else. And it was a fun place because it was like a locker room. It was just a bunch of guys hanging out.
Yep.
We listened to Howard Stern in the morning when we were there. And, it probably would not be compliant in the current work environment. I doubt we could do what we did.
You might have some harassment claims, as they like to say. You might,
we might have some issues there, and we were just, we were brutal to each other. We joked around a lot. And, but it was a fun time. That's for sure. That.
Well, you made reference, and I'd forgotten about that experience, but you brought it out, and that is the. Well, how do we want to describe it? Would we call it a seance? Would we call it the fax machine worship hour? We're so worried about that because some people, we do have about a third of our listeners who have no idea what they're talking about.
We took phone calls too, but at the time, the fax was the way orders came over. So we had a kick-ass fax machine. It had lots of paper in it, so lots of work. And
was it single sheet paper or were you on the thermal roll?
We were on the thermal at first, and then we upgraded to the single sheet paper. It really went big time.
And Glenn, for those newer or younger individuals, what's a fax machine?
Yeah, it's this thing that it rings like a phone.
Yep.
But then printed paper comes out that somebody scanned on the other end. The thermal was great because it get all over your hands. It's like shiny, but and we rip those off and staple them to the front of a folder.
Yep.
We were high tech. Of course, I was in. You're looking up microfiche and all that kind of stuff too. So yeah, I mean, the fax machine was just where money came out of. I mean, it came out of the fax machine. And if you had a problem with your fax machine, oh my goodness, the world was bad.
That was bad.
You can't get money. It's not. They won't print money. So we took care of that thing.
I heard somebody.
I remember when we went to.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
We used to have. You used to take photos.
Yes.
Camera, and we'd swing by the 1 hour photo place. There was a girl that ran the photo place for her family. Her name was Dale. She was a great, just fun person to talk to and meet with. But we'd stop there on the way into the office, and then at lunchtime you might go back out, grab lunch, and pick up your photos. And and it cost money too. It was you would pray that your photos had turned out.
Yes.
I had no idea if the front photo that you took from, I was up in Lancaster or Palmdale a lot, which was like 2 hours away from our office, and an hour away from me. And God forbid that any of those photos would not turn out because you had no idea.
That was the worst. That was the worst.
You drive around looking for listings, taking a picture of the listing and writing the number down because you didn't know if it was the right size house or not.
Nope.
And that was in addition to stopping by realtor offices to look at their books. So, the technology has come a long way in the industry, and especially in Southern California. We have so much data here.
Yes.
We have like permits online now and, MLS and I mean, all the things that we can use to look up data without leaving our seats. That's probably while my weight is up because I'm not having to actually work so hard.
Well,
that was fascinating.
I appreciate you touching on that, Glenn, because what a lot of people don't realize is, what they might see as a scanner today was a fax machine then, whereas you put something in and you could actually make a physical copy of it, but you could also transmit it to someone else, which had never been done before. And you did not require the United States Postal Service. And FedEx didn't exist back then in prevalence compared to the timing you're speaking of.
We used to fax a copy, the first few pages of the report.
Oh, really? Wow.
We would fax to the lender, so they had that, and then we'd send the hard copy. It was kind of like, here, so you can get started on underwriting, and you have the numbers and that kind of stuff. And then we'd put the report. We had special envelopes with our company name on them, and they'd be mailed or dropped off. We actually had a marketing guy who would drop them off sometimes.
Oh, wow. That's amazing stuff because, Glenn, as you touch on, and I love your reference, and that is when the fax machine was printing, you were making money because
absolutely
the receipt in the fax machine, like what was coming across, were appraisal orders. And I distinctly remember that one. That brought back a phenomenal memory there at 1000 North Halstead. Walk in, and the morning would be a good morning or a bad morning. It just depended on how many transmissions came across the fax machine. You're like, ooh, there's a lot here. That's right. And a boss would take all the good orders, and then all the ones that were like ridiculously far away. It felt like you were, in some cases, we're driving to another state. You're like, all right, I'm going to log hundreds of miles here to get this done.
Yeah. Well, the great thing too is if you had East Coast clients and you're in California, some days you'd walk in and there'd be work already in the basket before you even walk in the door.
Yes.
Like,
man.
And then you walk in and there's none in there, and you're like, oh man, this is gonna be a rough day. And
so
the times of of that were pretty fascinating. Of course, it's no different than email now. You
Yes.
fire up the email in the morning and hope that there's
Yeah,
orders.
let that baby run all night. Somebody had once described the fax machine much like the stork. The stork delivers a lot of little babies around families and households, and fax machine wasn't too much different. It was doing a lot of deliveries.
That's for sure. So,
wow. So when you go back to this time, so because of this introduction, you get to start right into a firm. What was it like back then from a training standpoint to help people kind of get a sense of both similarities and differences to today?
I would imagine that it still happens to this day, but it was, are you going to follow somebody around for a couple of weeks and then we're going to cut you loose and learn by, trial by fire.
Trial by fire.
It was just, and then, not that you couldn't talk to somebody or things like that, but the training, it was how quickly can we get you to make us money? And that's what it was. Fortunately, we actually had some foreclosure clients already. We had the keys for the Great Western REO department.
Oh, yeah.
So they'd send us an order, and then we had a copy of the key that they would rekey it to. And that was great because you could go out and inspect a property as a trainee, provisional at the time. And you could be there for 3 hours if you needed to be.
Yeah. And Glenn, you and I know exactly what you're talking about, but a lot of people have no clue what you're talking about. What do you mean by the key? I mean, 'cause some people are thinking like security key, like 16 digits, like passcode. You do not mean that at all.
Yeah, no, we actually had a physical key, and the REO real estate owned, which is really uncommon right now in the market, but there was tons of them back then. And we had the physical key, and every REO for that bank would be rekeyed to the same key, the same key itself, physical key. So we had multiple copies in our office so different appraisers could go to different areas and do them.
Oh, yeah.
And it was great because you'd go there and unlock the door and property's vacant. Now, these are foreclosure properties, so they're a little nasty sometimes, but they're great for training because, again, you could take your time, you don't feel rushed, and you don't really have to, make the homeowner aware, this person's new and doesn't know what they're doing yet. So it was great on that front. And, I remember, especially now, I can do a pretty thorough inspection fairly quickly now, especially with technology. Mm-hmm. So, but my first one, I remember measuring around the fireplace and including that. And I mean, just,
love it.
My first one, I'm going to get it, I was there for like an hour and a half for a 1,200 square foot house. And,
oh my goodness.
It was ridiculous. But, that's how you learn. But yeah, it was trial by fire, and we were a pretty freewheeling firm. You had to kind of hit the value or get close, or they aren't going to give you work. Comp checks, and I ran comp checks.
What's a comp check, Glenn? For those people who have never heard of such a genius.
The broker sent you the address and says, "Hey, we kind of need." Of course, back then the values weren't what they are now. But we need $300,000 on this property. You think we can get it? And somebody would pull the data, and one of the appraisers would look at it, and that was just part of your job was to help empty that basket, to tell them thumbs up or thumbs down. How good if we were close enough for them to even order the appraisal. So it was again the Wild West.
Why would they make that request?
Well, because they didn't want to proceed and pay for an appraisal that wasn't going to do them any good. So if they needed $300,000 to qualify for the loan, to get the loan, and it was going to be, somewhere around $250,000, they didn't want to waste the money. They didn't want to waste their time on it. So, I remember when Dodd-Frank hit, and we got cut off from those. That's the biggest complaint people had was you couldn't do a comp check. And it was a big part of the business. I mean, it was how you generated work with your broker clients was doing comp checks. And we would tell them, there's no guarantee, and we don't really know until we see the house. But it was just part of the business and something you had to do to survive.
Especially at that low end of the industry. I mean, that was just how you got in. You might bump into somebody, literally socializing. You mentioned you were in the nightlife industry for a little bit, or in the food service industry. And they're like, oh, you're a broker. Like, oh, I happen to do some appraisal. Like, oh, great. Hey, maybe we can work together. They, of course, sent you over all the crappiest assignments. And they said, hey, I'm going to do a loan on this for 180. And just let me know for sure it's good, and I'll send you the order. You're like,
Right. Yeah.
oh, those were the days.
I really can't. I really don't know until I see the house and do the process.
Absolutely.
Sure. Yeah. So it was.
Plus, it was all it was DOS based. I mean, you didn't have access. There were no photos back then. I mean, people they don't understand. People just don't even begin to understand how much data did not exist back then. You had an address, and that was it.
Right.
You didn't know how many bedrooms were in that house, how many bathrooms, what size it was. You had no clue.
Well, we were using microfiche.
Yeah.
And in Southern California, we had this thing called CMDC, the something data collective thing, where on a purchase, when you were a member of the CMDC, if you did a purchase appraisal, you would send them the first 2 pages of the report, and I think the floor plan.
All right.
To give the information about the subject property that you were appraising.
Yes.
And then they would produce a book they would send out once a month to you.
Oh, really?
That would have more detailed information on the properties than you were used to seeing in your other data sources. And the other great thing was it had the Thomas Guide numbers on it.
And what's the Thomas Guide?
Because Thomas Guide was our local map book in Southern California.
Yes.
You would buy your Thomas Guide every year.
Yep.
It cost like $20-$30. And it was your map book that you looked at to drive around. There was no cell phones. There was no Google MapQuest, Google Maps, and there's none of that. When my daughter was born, I had a pager. I was very up on the technology. I had a pager that went off saying that wife's in labor. So,
oh my gosh.
We had pagers. We had no cell phones, none of that kind of stuff. It was.
Love it.
Again, the ease.
Oh, real quick. What's a pager, Glenn?
The pager was this little device you had. It was, a rectangle that, would page you to a number. So if somebody wanted to reach you, they would call the number on your pager.
Yep.
PageNet was the service that we used.
Mm-hmm.
And they would punch in their number, and then you would get a page, and then you'd have to go find a payphone or something like that.
What's a payphone, Glenn?
Payphone is the phone on the, side of the road, or phone. Restaurants used to have a payphone outside of them.
Yep.
Again, this is all pre-cell phone days. And I remember actually when I was waiting on people as a waiter, the first cell phones came out, these business guys came in with this big monstrosity of a thing, but it was their cell phone.
It's like the size of a briefcase, but it had a phone sitting on top of it.
It was ridiculous.
Yeah.
And they're, of course, obnoxious. You're like, get out of here. If you're going to talk on the phone, go outside. But yeah, but the technology that became available for everybody took quite some time to come out. And, we didn't have cell phones or anything like that in the pager. And you could learn on the pager to type messages by punching in a number.
Yeah.
A number in the right sequence. You could say hello or things like that.
911 or whatever.
Or 911.
I had an uncle.
So we had codes for how important to return when the office paged you. And
it was.
Real.
I mean, it was text messaging before text messaging existed. And like for my uncle, who was a very accomplished plastic surgeon, we first saw a pager when Uncle Butch wore what looked like today, for many people, it might look like a device they wear if they're diabetic, but it was a pager. And
correct.
Yeah. And he'd be looking down and it would almost always be like, call the office or whatever the office number was.
Yeah.
So it was that communication ability that previously did not exist. And some say the world was better when it didn't exist because you were less.
Well, there's pluses and minuses to all of that. Funny that you mentioned the diabetes. I'm actually diabetic, and I do have an insulin pump.
Yep.
That insulin pump looks just like a pager, but it does way more than a pager ever did.
Yes, it does.
It's amazing the technology that goes into that too. So,
man, do you wear a CGM?
Yeah.
Oh,
I have a CGM, an insulin pump.
Yep.
And I've got a new one coming actually next week because mine's, I've had this one for almost 5 years now.
Oh, okay.
So I'm getting the newer one that'll be even better and more. Hopefully they'll have removed some of the things that annoy me about the technology, but mostly it's just harassing me. But typically I could probably avoid it by eating better or things like that. So
when you know better, do better, but that doesn't mean you're going to do better.
Yeah, that's a whole other thing.
So here you are, you're driving all over the California urban environment for the most part, obviously being in Pasadena and the surrounding areas. You got a pager. You know what payphones are, where you actually can change. And that doesn't mean like change your clothes. That means like literally that metal money that was worth
dimes and quarters.
Dimes and quarters.
The dimes were actually the most relevant then because it was, a dime to call.
Mm-hmm.
Then it got to where you needed quarters.
Yeah, you needed quarters.
Stuff like that. So
we had that money dropping in the machine, making sure it actually clicked through so you could execute the call.
Well, and the thing with the pager too, like say my daughter was born in 93. So I would drive up to Palmdale, Lancaster, which is a desert, north of LA. And it was an hour to an hour and a half, depending on the property. So this was the last day I was going to go that far away because, my wife was going to be due soon. Of course, that's the day she goes into labor, and I get a page as I'm coming out of the mountains down the hill in Palmdale.
Jeez.
Where I get the page.
The page.
And this is the first time I ever had a car with the check engine light, the idiot light.
Oh, yeah.
And that day is the first time that light ever came on.
My goodness, Glenn, what an experience.
So I get a page and my light comes on. I pull over, check engine, great. I pull over, pop the hood, nothing oddball happening, close the hood and keep on going.
Yeah.
And so when I knocked on the door of the property, I said, I just got the page about my wife being in labor. Can I make a call? So I'm an hour away from, the hospital. So I called and it's not going to be imminent. So I actually finished and did the appraisal. And then raced back through the mountains, just because it was through the foothills of northern LA County. And of course, baby wasn't born until like that night.
Yeah. It's the first one.
But yeah, I was like I said, this is the final day. I'm not going to go this far away anymore, honey. I'll be close so that, I can be here for you. And, life obviously never works out that way.
The market right now is tough for appraisal companies. Many companies are having a hard time getting enough work with the same marketing they used to. Is your company struggling, having a hard time getting new customers or getting additional work from existing customers? The answer to this problem is easier than you think. Do more business with the people you already know. Over 10 years, the average U.S. appraisal firm meets over 17,000 potential customers. That's a lot of people you could be doing business with right now. But it's a big problem if you don't have a proven process to communicate with them. StoryLux turns this problem into an opportunity to grow. Our advanced AI marketing tool can rebuild your contact lists and harvest long-forgotten communications. Imagine reaching out to everyone you've ever met with just one click. For the cost of 1 or 2 appraisals a month, StoryLux helps you reconnect and market to people who already know you, like you, trust you, and want to do business with you. Act now by contacting StoryLux today to turn your business growth dreams into reality. Email appraisal@storylux.com. That is appraisal@storylux.com. And now back to part 2 of the episode.
So to help people get a sense of it, you mentioned that opportunity early on that you were working with, your firm was working with Security Pacific Bank. What was it like doing REOs? What was the methodology you got trained on for handling those type of assignments?
Yeah, the REOs were great. It had repair needs. Sometimes it was major, sometimes it was minor. So you learned about estimates. Some of them would get estimates for you. So I got a pretty good education on rough estimates for, simple repairs and, holes in walls and missing roofs and, roofs, old and worn out and things like that. But we also got an education on, and it's kind of odd now because the market now is basically everything sells pretty quick.
Yeah.
But back then it was normal marketing time was 3 to 6 months.
Oh, yeah.
And the banks would want to know, well, what do we have to reduce it to sell it in 90 days?
Exactly.
So you had to analyze the market and the sales, what sales sold that quickly, and what was the price difference? Was it
a
10% discount, a 5% discount, whatever? So it was a great learning experience because you had to deal with lots of unusual things in an REO report that you wouldn't deal with in a refinance or purchase report for the most part. So that education was really, really good. And of course, I had no idea what type of education I was getting, but it was great. It really made you think about things and analyze issues. How does the market react to that? And it was my first exposure to, oh, it's $10,000 repair. I'll just make a $10,000 adjustment. No, we don't. That's not how we do that, Glenn. Oh,
are you sure, Glenn? That's not how it works.
Yeah. So, and now there might be some people out there now that might be shocked by that statement, and it's okay if you're shocked by that statement because I was shocked by that too.
Yes,
so it's part of the learning process as an appraiser, and doing appraisals for non-bank purposes. Mm-hmm. Is a way to really, really learn appraising because the refinance Fannie Freddie world, really, I think you even mentioned it. It's kind of the bottom feeder part. I mean, it's not, if that's all you do, that doesn't mean you're a bottom feeder, but it's just follow stay in the box, check the boxes that they want checked, answer the stupid questions they want answered, but let's not do any real appraising here because real appraising leads to questions that nobody wants to be asked.
Yes.
So a great example of that was you could not check declining on page 1.
Bringing back a lot of memories. Why could you not check declining, Glenn?
The market could be dropping like a rock.
Yep.
But it was stable.
And what happened if you checked the box?
You lost a client.
Yep. Why did you lose a client?
You lost a client. Because it killed the deal.
Why did it kill the deal? Do you know why?
Because the banks don't want to take on risk. Declining market is risk.
And that was part of it. The other lot of, depending on which mortgage brokers you worked with, the other part of it was it required the borrower to come in with more equity or more down payment, sometimes have as much as 10% more. Yeah. If they were coming in with 5 or 10 and suddenly they had to go to 10 or 20, or they were coming in with 20 and suddenly they had to go to 30, most cases there was no financial wherewithal for them to complete it. And
correct.
Oh, yeah. I remember many an ass chewing from brokers when they're like, you can't check that box. I'm like, dude, the market is going down. My deal's going to die. I'm like, I'm not here to make your deal, dude. I'm like, you want to know what the property's worth and you got to know the market conditions to know how the property fits. And you're like, I won't say that. It was colorful. It was not friendly and it was demeaning in an effort to have professionals change the information they were reporting. And it sounds like hopefully you and definitely me, we just chose to lose the clients. It sucked, but that's just the way it went.
Right. Well, that's just that education really of the industry that you're in. And it's something that, I look back now, I think it's really important to let new people understand that there's more than just bank appraising in the field.
Yeah.
There's more than just Fannie and Freddie basic stuff in the field, but you have to educate yourself to be able to do the other stuff. Learn as an appraiser, you have ethical responsibilities and fiduciary responsibilities, and it's not just it's not a job for someone who doesn't have those things.
Very much.
We're the referee, we're the umpire, we're the person who has to be able to have people screaming at us. What the heck are you doing? That was a strike. And you've got to be okay with that. You got to be
totally,
or you can't really be an appraiser. I mean, you got to understand that it's your job to be impartial and just report the facts, and whether other people like them or not isn't relevant. So,
no, that is definitely the case. What was the methodology that you learned at your first firm around how to value REOs and do the as is and as repaired? Because a lot of people actually have never had, no matter what type of valuation work they do, they've never worked in that space, so they haven't been subjected to, in some cases, the significant challenges of valuing those properties that are sitting right amongst other, what appear to be similar, but really not, properties.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that was the one good thing is because there was a lot of foreclosures, you had market data that demonstrated that.
Lucky you.
Although the one thing too was the majority of the time, our as is and 90-day quick sale values were still way higher than what the broker was telling them, because the broker just wanted an easy deal that didn't have to be any work. So you'd get the realtor broker that was going to list the property would be the one that would start arguing with you. But you had to understand, if the normal marketing time is 3 to 6 months to get $300,000, how much you have to drop the price to where somebody will buy it faster. So you'd have to analyze the data and days on market and stuff like that to see that. And then as is versus as repaired, I call it the hassle factor, but if it's got 20,000 in repairs, how does that affect what somebody's willing to pay?
Exactly.
Well, they're taking on the hassle and the risk of more repairs that aren't known.
Yes.
So they don't want to pay 20,000 less. They want to pay some other number less.
30, 40, 50. It all depends on what that amount was relative to the value of the property, too. 20,000 on a $500,000 property is very different than 20,000 on a $100,000 property.
Right. And this was back when, values seemed reasonable. We've got areas now that 10, 12 years ago where median sale price was 150, 200,000 in some parts of LA.
Yes.
And those same markets are now 900,000 median.
That's fascinating.
Sale price.
Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing cheap here at all. No. So, and the numbers make a difference in the price range too.
They do.
So we had to really learn to analyze that.
How did you all learn that? Was that just, was it, you had a Buddha in the corner and you just went over and rubbed the Buddha for wisdom? Or was it handed down some tablets from on high? Or did you all have contractors you regularly called? Or, again, it's a unique skill set that most people don't have.
Well, we learned the WAG method.
The WAG method. Talk about the WAG method.
So we did the WAG of, for me, I developed a lot more from just looking at data.
Of course.
But our training was pretty weak, and not that the appraisers weren't good. The guy that trained me, I still know him today. He's a great appraiser. Yeah. We just didn't spend a lot of time training. It was more about production, and we would have discussions.
Of course.
There weren't specific methodologies even discussed in depth.
No, that makes sense.
And I find that to be the case in the industry still. There's still not enough discussion of methodologies. But so we would, there's kind of the standard things like, we 10% more, 20%.
Rules of thumb. I don't know how big your thumb is.
Sometimes the rules are bigger or smaller. Now, we didn't have the adjustment sheet.
Okay.
So that we did not have.
I'm glad to hear that.
I don't have any of those from history to publish.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, thankfully. But we had rules of thumb, and it was just...
See, Glenn...
it wasn't the way you did it. It wasn't until I went out on my own and I started really being responsible for myself that I realized that I got to look at, there's 3 comps or 4 comps or 6 comps in a report.
Yep.
But I'll look at 20, 30, 40 comps in some situations.
Yeah, totally.
Because the more data I analyze, the more crystal clear it sits in my head. And the other thing is calling and discussing it with the agents.
Yeah, that's good too.
And people view agents as an adversary, and I view agents as an absolute necessity to do a good job as an appraiser.
Yeah, that's exactly.
So calling agents and discussing something with them. What was happening? How many? What kind of offers? What were the buyer's agents saying? You talk to the buyer's agent. What were your clients saying?
Yep.
Why were they willing to pay that or not pay that?
That makes sense.
And man, I'll tell you, I do that now, especially on comps that don't seem to fit in the data set.
Yes.
Because you get great data sets.
Oh, yeah.
Everything's in a narrow range, and the C4 is obviously lower than the C3 or the C2.
Yep.
Then you get that one oddball thing that's a C4 and sold up here. What the heck's going on?
What's that all about?
You call the agent, 9 times out of 10, you've answered all the questions you need to understand why.
Yes.
And whether that means throwing that out because it was a market price versus market value.
Sure.
Or realizing there was some other factor you weren't aware of that made it sell high or low or whatever. So talking to agents is the biggest thing. Of course, it's the most time-consuming thing.
That's totally,
which is
totally the case.
Unpleasant in the world of efficiency.
You touch on an important thing, and given your poli-science background and engineering your engineering disposition, being strong in math and science, I thought for sure you were going to tell us that you upgraded the WAG method to the SWAG method. Because you got to bring that science to the wild ass guess. I mean, that's what it's all about.
Yeah, well, later on, I did do some of that.
That's good to hear.
But yeah, my initial training was non-scientific. It was just WAG.
Yeah, it's just WAG. And I appreciate you touching on that importance of actually reaching out and making those phone calls, because I know for me, I did not get into that distress space until I'd already been investing for quite a while. So for me, foreclosure, loss mitigation, short sale, like any kind of distressed work actually wasn't difficult, because my experience was literally from hiring all the contractors and doing all the work and owning those kind of properties and doing value add stuff. But for most people, they get no experience in any of that. And there's no real textbook for it. I mean, sure, you can go to like a cost manual, and that's better than nothing. I mean, and most appraisal firms don't have cost data. And if they do, it's not current. But even then, there's how do you measure the entrepreneurial incentive for someone to take on the risk plus the time? And quite the best way to get there is talk to the people that are buying those properties and say, what would you buy this for? And much like you said, talking to the broker, then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, like from on high, the results get dropped in your lap. You're like, this is the best. I know you get paid 5 or 7% of the purchase price, and we get paid like peanuts, but thank you for giving me my appraisal.
Right. Yeah, like I say, the more research you do and the more you talk to people, the better. Thankfully now I have a developer friend and another contractor friend that does some flips.
Oh, nice.
If I got a question on something, I just send them a text. We talk all the time about things, and I don't always agree with them either.
Yes.
They have certain things in their mind that they think are true that the data says otherwise, but it's still important to understand the thinking of those potential buyers and people in the market transaction place.
Yeah.
To understand what's really going on. So
that's a phenomenal experience. And you talk about, learning it from the ground up. How did that continue to contribute? How long did you stay at that firm before your next opportunities opened up? I mean, you mentioned about showing up the day after your firstborn is there, your daughter was born, and then it's like, is the fax machine broken? There's like what do you mean there's no new orders? What's going on?
Right. So that was my first experience with that, and I was less than a year into my career.
Oh, goodness.
So, and that's, it's been 4 or 5 times we've had to do that.
Yep.
So we just sat down, had a powwow, and number one, we'd be calling, just begging for orders from people.
Yep.
Appraisers, we got on the phone and begged people for orders, just like we had a marketing guy. But then we also started looking at, doing more foreclosure work and finding variety in our clients instead of just your standard, whatever bank or broker clients. What different types of clients can we have that will have work when others don't?
Yes.
So that was the first time I really had to address diversification.
Oh, okay.
And not having all your eggs in one basket, so to speak. So that was, again, it's all great experience.
Mm-hmm.
It's all part of the process.
Sure.
And I've got, I hired trainees a few years ago. I finally reached that point where I did that.
Yes.
And what we've gone through in the last 3 or 4 years in the appraisal world is 10 years of learning in a 3-year time span. So there's times when I tell them, I'm like, there's no charge for the experience. You just learn way more. You're so far advanced in your knowledge than I was at your stage because of what you've been through. So it's, there's times when it just kind of, especially joining and rocking and rolling, it's busier than all. Hey, this is great. I love being an appraiser. And then all of a sudden the interest rates go up and there's no work. And you're like, wait, what? It's like, that happens. And especially if you're in bank work, that happens.
Yeah, that is definitely.
So you gotta understand that. And that's where you got to learn not only as an appraiser, because then you do other types of assignments that require different types of thinking, analysis, and support, but you also have to, if you're working for yourself, you need to be a business owner. So, and I think that's an important thing when you become an appraiser. You got to kind of pick your lane of what do I want to be? What is my personality? What am I willing to do? What am I not willing to do? And there's some that, being a staff appraiser for a bank or an AMC, is a great fit because they don't want to have to be in charge of everything else, and they want to follow a process and do their job and check out and go home, and there's nothing wrong with that. And then there's people that I'm going to work for myself, but aren't willing to do the things necessary to learn how to run a business.
Yes.
And plan for the day when there's no bank orders coming over and have more than 2 clients and things like that, and the responsibility that goes with that, especially if you've got a family. So, and nobody teaches any of that kind of stuff in the industry. There's very little discussion of that within the industry, much less methods of determining adjustments and things like that. As technology has increased, our ability to analyze data has gone off the charts. So you're no longer looking on a microfiche and trying to figure out a time adjustment, right? From microfiche, you've actually got many, many sophisticated tools and methodologies that you can use to support time adjustments and other things.
Yeah, you make a good statement there. One I'd probably just clarify a bit, and that is it maybe, and I'll just ask it. I heard you say that our ability to analyze the data has gone off the charts. Is it ability or is it opportunity?
Yeah, opportunity is probably a better word. Right? There's more.
I think that's the general.
That we're able to analyze.
Yes.
Whether we analyze it or not, it's probably a whole nother.
Yeah, that's the problem with a lot of users and clients of appraisers. They're like, dude, can you do something with it? I don't need you just to state it for me. Like, add value here.
Yeah. Right. Well, I think the thing that I find interesting is that Fannie and Freddie have been on on the warpath.
Yes.
Of late.
Yes.
About proving your adjustments, and they had data where people are still adjusting, $25 a foot for square footage, and I'm in Southern California where there's just nothing that low. Although I've done a couple of retrospective appraisals lately, back in like the 90s and even the 80s.
Oh wow!
And I've used numbers like that for the first time in probably 20 years.
Yes.
It's pretty fascinating. But I just find the bank industry has been very lax in their requirements to prove what you're doing.
Sure.
They've let you get away with just stating, I adjusted $50 a foot or $100 a foot or $200 a foot with no support for it whatsoever. And now they're coming down, well, why won't these people do that? And it's like, well, nobody's been demanding it, and the lenders don't care. The lenders just want to make the loan. So Fannie and Freddie would have to drive it.
Yes.
But now they're driving it, but the fees that should be higher to do what they're asking you to do. And they're where they are, and that's, if you're not going to get a reasonable fee, you're not going to put that kind of time into it. No. Unless you're forced to.
It's that brutal trade-off where, you're engaged to do the scope of work. You either do the scope of work or you don't. You like the fee or you don't. I mean, those are just acknowledgments. And a lot of the fundamental problems in the industry right now, as you touch on, are yes, there's changes and there's solutions that haven't been delivered that needed to be. But one of the bigger ones is because the industry hasn't continued to meet the needs of clients didn't value what was being done, drove the price down. And now, as you pointed out, it's that. It's kind of like, the wave goes in and hits the beach, but the energy of the wave still comes back out into the ocean. And a lot of that's starting to come back out. It'll be interesting to see if the fees do rise to address the complexity and the education level that needs to do some of that work. And look, if the fees were significantly higher, this industry wouldn't have the problem it has, but it had to have been doing a lot better work to earn those fees.
Yeah, it's kind of a catch-22. Yeah. I think, from the number of downturns I've been through, I think the underwriters are the key to that. And I think the underwriter is the weak link in the process, quite honestly. Because if the underwriters were fully trained and demanded that you comply, and I think if they did that with the brokers before 08, if they would have said, listen, if I get a fraudulent appraisal from one of your appraisers, we're not doing loans for you guys ever.
That's a good point.
They wouldn't be asking the appraisers to do the things that they did that they shouldn't have done.
Yes.
And so I think that would have been a great solution back then.
Yeah, it would have been.
But I think both appraisers and the industry understanding what our role is.
Yes.
And I don't think enough people understand that, even appraisers.
No,
Our role is very specific in society. We are the only part in the process with no skin in the game.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I joke with people like, I don't care. I don't care if you get your loan. I don't care if you buy the house. I don't care. You know, am I a jerk? And probably, but that's a separate topic. But it's not my job to care. My job is to give you the information so you can make the proper decision with the proper information. And as soon as my job is twisted elsewhere, there's no benefit to using me.
Yes.
What good is it to use me if I'm not independent and unbiased and, you know, all the things that an umpire or a referee would be, right? We are the umpire or referee of the real property value world. And even like for the other things too, the business valuation and other types of valuation, we're the umpire or referee. So we need to realize that.
Yeah. And
then society needs to realize that.
No, so there's definitely a public image issue there. But speaking of learnings, though, you mentioned that at a point in time you took on some trainees. What was that experience like for you? Given that it was new for you and it was a learning curve on both sides, both for you and for them.
Yeah, it revitalized me, quite honestly.
Oh, really?
I mean, I love appraising.
Yes.
I love the job of being an appraiser. I enjoy that you're inside half the time and outside the other half. And you get to see some amazing properties. I mean, Southern California with so much architectural history and uniqueness that it's just really incredible the things I get to see. I'm a foodie, so I get to go try food in different areas of Southern California.
Nice.
Which is fantastic. So I always say the only person I would trade jobs with would be Guy Fieri on Triple D. Because if I got paid to go taste food all over the country or even the world the way it was done in, I would trade.
Maybe you could get on Guy's team and you could offer real estate services alongside those diners, drives, and diners.
There you go.
Diners,
traveling appraiser.
Diners. Totally forgot the
Triple D thing. Yeah. Diners, drive-ins, and dives.
Yeah, dives. There it is. But
anyway, but I did reach a point where, you know, I was always of the mindset that I don't want to be in charge of people. I don't want to have to, you know, deal that. But then you reach a point where you're like, you know, I'm tired today because I have to do all the work.
Yes.
And even when I had hired somebody to help me run the office and do some of the other stuff that doesn't require me as an appraiser to do it, I was still working like a dog because it was me.
Yes.
Just me and then her. But she wasn't appraising. She was just helping me administratively.
Oh, I see.
So I reached a point where now I want to bring a trainee in. And it was at the time where you're like, you know what? The industry really needs to bring trainees in. We need diversity on many fronts.
Yes.
I'm not a big fan of diversity for diversity's sake, but our industry is one that needs that in many fronts. And my biggest thing is we need young people, right? We need young people to come into the industry and get their perspective of the new technology, the new science, the new analysis methods. So we really need that. So, but I realized too, I need to do a good job of training them because I know that my training was insufficient.
Got it.
And my training was probably the most common method of training that there has been in the last 30 years. The banks used to do the training, but now the banks stopped having their own staff for the most part, although they're going back to that a little bit more. But so I needed to bring somebody on, but it made me a better appraiser because I had to explain what I was doing and why.
Yes.
Because you get that question, well, where'd you get that from? And I'm like, you can't say, well,
I said so.
Because I said so, or said a little thumb, or it feels about, you can't do that. You have to be able to help them understand what they're doing and why they're doing it. So I created a lot of training, methods and videos and processes, not just for how to do an appraisal, but just how to run the office, how to do things like that. So, and it rejuvenated me. It really got me excited about that part of the industry and about creating something more than just me being an appraiser. I started doing mastermind appraisal groups too.
Oh, okay.
I joined Roy Meyer's group.
Yep.
And then I eventually joined Blaine Fine's group.
Great.
And
good guys.
Hanging with other appraisers who were business owners.
Yeah.
That's that business owner hat. We were put on the business owner hat more than the appraiser hat. But it's how do you train people? How do you build systems and processes that are easy to follow and understand to make it easier to train people and easier to have other people do things that, I don't need to be the one that pulls the plat map for every report. That's not necessary. So how can I teach somebody how to do that?
Yes.
So that we can be more efficient and that kind of thing. So it became an efficiency thing in addition to a training thing. And it was just it's been a great experience. I'm still learning all of that, and having somebody train and learn is fun. It's fun to help them through the process because the appraisal worlds can be challenging. So to help somebody, to mentor somebody through that is a great feeling, and I enjoy it.
That's fantastic. Well, Glenn, given everything that you've seen and everything you've experienced and all that you've learned, what are you excited about or looking forward to over the next 3 to 5 years?
I think there's going to be tons of change in the industry. It will be some good and some bad, as with everything in life. I think that the thing that excites me, again, I'm getting up there in age, so it's important to keep your mind sharp and have to learn new things. Mm-hmm. So I've gotten into a lot of the data science stuff that's being talked about in the industry. I'm just dipping my toes in it and really enjoying it. And I've got a good understanding of the overview and application of it, and that really excites me. It's a different way of analyzing things, a more thorough and more accurate way, I think, of analyzing things. And most importantly, I think we're analyzing all of the data, not just 3 comps, right?
Yeah, that's a great point. So, I remember when Danny Wiley and I had the conversation 15 years ago.
The data science is a big thing.
Yeah.
And I enjoy that. But the other thing that I see within the industry is I see Fannie and Freddie and AMCs are taking control of the lender side of that.
Yes.
So I kind of feel like on the lender side, it's going to become a $25 an hour analyst position that they're going to create. And if you are in that side of it, it might not be quite as enjoyable.
Yeah.
But in the other arenas, other types of lenders, portfolio lenders, other non-lender, divorce, estate, data, death, right away, all the other things that are outside of the Fannie Freddie world, the data science is going to really make that. The ones who learn that are going to be the ones that are the cream of the crop in the industry. So as we see that develop, I think you'll see a huge transition on that front. And I think it'll bring more young people in.
Yeah.
Because it's more interesting than, 3 comps and pictures and, unsupported adjustments. So
no, that makes it.
But I see a portion of the industry, because I see that in a lot of other industries, of the corporatization and just, okay, that's a $25 an hour job or a $40 an hour job. And I make more than that as an appraiser. I feel I'm worth more than that.
Sure.
The skill set that I have. But I've got to work in an area where they appreciate that and are willing to pay that. So
yes,
the skill set required for an appraiser is changing dramatically. And it excites me because I've seen it and I'm willing to do it. But there's other people, you can tell that they're intimidated and afraid of it because they don't want to do that.
Yes.
And I think it's important in the industry to recognize that. And as an individual, recognize that and decide what lane do you want to be in. That's become my big mantra. Pick your lane. I want to be in this lane.
Yes.
Okay, do that.
Exactly.
Be an expert in that.
Yep.
But recognize that that's your lane. And if you want to go in this lane over here, you got to put your blinker on and get the education and do it. Right? You can't just change lanes without educating yourself to what that's going to involve. And recognizing, too, if you want to do bank work, you're going to say, hey, I'm going to do Fannie Freddie work.
Yep.
You're probably going to get pushed into a, $25, $30, $50 an hour job.
Yep.
That, if you're okay with that, if your life is good with that.
Yeah.
And that where you live is okay with that. And you have a spouse that works or whatever like that. And you guys are happy with that. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's important to recognize that. And that if you want to get paid more, you're going to have to elevate your skill set and shift to a different area to get paid more. So
I love it. That's
what I see in the industry.
Yep.
Much more data science, much more aggregate analysis. But I still feel it's great. Again, there's always going to be a need for appraisers.
Yes.
the data, like you look at a lot of regression analysis now, you run things and it suggests adjustments that are clearly not rational or reasonable. So there's no way technology is going to replace us.
It's true.
But technology is a great tool. And that's my view is technology is a tool, not a replacement. And I want to use as much of it as I can to make sure that I'm doing the best job that I can. And I enjoy using technology. I've been with a tablet in the field for 15 years. I've been paperless for like a dozen years. And I'm still amazed by the number of people that aren't. But the technology is really fun. I enjoy playing with new technology, whether it's efficiency stuff or analytical stuff. And I think that's the wave of the future, is how we use technology to do a better job.
I couldn't agree with you more. So we don't have to look to the appraisal industry for that. We can just look in our own personal lives and see how we're using so much technology, whether it's in our hands or in our cars or affecting even the way we choose to eat or where we choose to eat or what food gets delivered to.
The thing on my belt that used to be a pager 30 years ago is now an insulin pump that helps me manage my diabetes. So the difference in the technology for those two devices is a great example of where, what's changed since I became an appraiser.
I love it, Glenn. Man, it's a fantastic session. As I told you it would be, just so many perspectives, both historically of how far we've come and just the tip of the iceberg of where we're going. Glenn, I am grateful for all that you shared. And as I mentioned, there are probably at least 2 people, maybe even now 3 that have come to mind that you need to share this podcast with. So thank you for your generosity. Thank you for your interest. And more importantly, thanks for listening. We appreciate it. And Glenn, thank you for sharing your story.
My pleasure. My pleasure. It's everybody has a unique story, and it's fun to share mine.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Friends, until the next one, have a fantastic day.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Parusing's Appraisers on Purpose. We hope you enjoyed learning from the amazing professional paths and achievements of our beloved guests. Before we go, please subscribe on your listening channel, Spotify, LinkedIn, YouTube, and other podcast channels to hear more from appraisers and valuers regarding their life and their work. After you drop a comment below, who is one friend and peer you can generously share this episode with? If you have any suggestions or questions for future episodes, we'd love to hear from you. Just send us a message on LinkedIn and we'll be sure to get back to you. Thanks again for listening, and until we're together again for the next session of Parusing's Appraisers on Purpose, create the change that you seek.